Okay, I think everyone we're expecting more or less is now on the webinar. So I'm going to make a start. First of all, my name is Harri Lloyd Davies. I'm one of the partners here at Bevan and Buckland. We're putting this webinar on to try and give everyone an update on the position with COVID-19, the coronavirus, what we believe businesses should be doing, and some of the support that's out there. Just to let you know, this is the first time we've used this software. You know, we're trialing this. Obviously, we're all having to adapt to new ways of working. And if there's any questions anyone's got, or anyone's got any technical problems, there's a question and answer button, hopefully at the bottom of your screen. So please click on that, and hopefully you will be able to, we will deal with any problems as they arise. A lot of you have already sent in questions ahead of the webinar, so a huge thank you for that. I'm going to run through as many of those as I can at the end. But if there are any more questions that come up during the course of the webinar, again, use that question and answer button at the bottom. And I'll try and deal with as many as I can at the end. And any that we can't, we're going to try and put the answers as far as we can find them on the website in the next few days. Also, just to let you know, we are trying to record this webinar. So hopefully we'll put a recording on the webinar for other clients who haven't managed to log in now, so they can get the answers as well. So I want to flick into the main areas that we want to cover off today. I'm going to start by just saying a little bit about where we are at the moment, then spend most of the time really explaining what the support that's available to businesses is, and then finish with a few tips about what you need to be thinking about in terms of your cash flow management and other business considerations to look at this time. So in terms of where we are, the government have obviously put us into lockdown, and we've seen that have a huge impact already on a huge number of our customers. Many businesses are now shut. Other businesses like ourselves are fortunately able to do some or most of our work from home, and so we're continuing. But there are certainly a number of clients that we've seen who've been very badly affected, because even though they are still allowed to be open, they've seen their customer numbers, particularly in the last day or so, really drop. And so I've had to make the very difficult decision to shut. I think probably an important place to start is that, there's a huge amount of advice on the government websites. So, we strongly recommend you keep checking those, but also we are putting everything we can on our website. So you've got somewhere good to signpost you to them at different places. A number of people have said, how long do they think this is going to last? I'm not a scientist, and none of us are. But there are a lot of people who are saying that you really need to be working on the basis. We know the lockdown is going to last for probably 3 weeks. It could well be longer. And I think it's probably a reasonable assumption that it's going to take a few months for things to get back to anything like normal. And certainly if you're a business, and I was speaking to one of my hotel clients earlier this week, they pointed out that one of the big problems they've got is that when they reopen, they're not going to be back to business as usual. They rely on conferences, weddings, which have cancelled now well into the summer. So even if they were back up and running from even the 1st of June, it'll probably be weeks and months before they're really back up to running properly. So you need to be thinking about those sort of things for your business as well. But as I say, our advice at the moment is plan for the worst and hope for the best. And our role, certainly in the next few weeks, is to try and make sure everyone is fully aware of what support is available to you and do everything we can to make sure you can access it as quickly as possible. A quick point as well, Companies House, we've had a number of questions about whether filing deadlines have been extended. It was announced last night that you can now apply for an additional extension if you are going to be late filing because of the coronavirus. We're not really recommending people do it. We still recommend you try and get your books in on time if you can and get the accounts filed on time. But if you do need an extension, it can now be applied for, but it is not automatic. One sort of bit of advice we'd give all businesses is to make sure you're up to date, is sign up for the government alert COVID-19 alerts. That's the link, and we'll email everyone who's on the webinar today a copy of these slides so you can go in and download those links and sign up yourself. So I just want to now touch on the main UK government support that's been announced to date. I believe there will be more. Certainly there's very little support at the moment, and I'll touch on this later, for self-employed workers, and we expect more to come out for them. But this is what we know so far. So there's the coronavirus job retention scheme, and that's the thing which is the new scheme where you get 80% of their wages. They've also announced a deferral of VAT and income tax. Statutory sick pay relief has come back in for SMEs on a temporary basis. There are business rates holidays for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. Small grants and slightly larger grants for certain business sectors, and the smaller businesses, all businesses we believe will get something. The Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme is also launched yesterday. And finally, there's more HMRC time to pay. So those are the headline measures. And I'm going to talk about a few of these today, the main two being the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme and the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, as those are the two that are probably of most interest to most people. Just to let you know, again, lots of links on that page, but since devolution, if you're looking at the gov.uk website for advice, be aware that really mainly applies to England, and it will often say England only. But don't worry, most of the time the same support is available in Wales, but you'll need to check the Welsh website for those for the exact details of what's in Wales. And there are subtle differences in some areas. And if you've got businesses or branches based in other parts of the UK and Ireland, we've tried to give you all the different links there so you can understand the local support that's available. So to kick off with, I just want to go through the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. This is something that is brand new and was announced last Friday. And if I'm honest, thank goodness it was, because there are an awful lot of businesses that would have probably shut for good by today if there wasn't a huge intervention like this undoubtedly is. What it is an opportunity for you to furlough your workers. So if you've got staff that you've now had to shut your business and you basically would normally have to lay them off or make them redundant, if you now keep those employees on your books, the government will fund 80% of their salaries for essentially March, April and May. It could be extended, but at the moment they've confirmed that it will apply for March, April and May. There is a cap, as it says on the screen there, so it's only up to £2,500 per month. So if you've got higher paid employees, it will not apply to them. But bear in mind that those are workers that have to be can do no work for you anymore, and you need to make sure you write to them to confirm to them they are on furlough and that they are no longer to do any work for your business for the time being. Probably the most common question that I got asked before this webinar started was, how do I apply for this money and when is it going to arrive? I'll touch on this a bit more later, but the short answer is we don't know. We've been told that HMRC will set up a portal, but there are no further details available on that as yet. So I just want to run through a load of questions on this new job retention scheme, and then hopefully I will cover off the majority of the ones that have come in. As I say, we advise this applies to any staff for whom there is no work because of the new restrictions, and they're not likely to have any work until the business and social distancing restrictions are lifted, and who would otherwise have been dismissed. We do strongly recommend you try and get some HR advice on this. Everyone has different employment contracts, different handbooks. So depending what your specific circumstances are, you may need to make sure that you're complying with your own HR rules. But in principle, you need to write to the affected employees to tell them that they've been put on furlough, and then you will be able to reclaim, we hope, 80% of their wages. Certainly one of the questions I got asked in advance was, is this going to be means tested? So if you're a business with strong reserves and lots of cash, will you still be able to apply for it? As far as we are concerned, the answer to that is yes. But as I say, we cannot give any guarantees until we see the detail, and as yet the government has issued nothing other than the headlines. In terms of qualifying criteria for furlough employees, as I say, there is nothing that's been published as yet. But as far as we're concerned, staff should probably have been contracted employees as at the 20th of February. We've been contacted by a number of people who've asked, well, can I put my subcontractors now onto the payroll so they are protected? We don't know the absolute answer to that yet, but we think the revenue are probably likely to reject those claims if anything like that were to happen. As I mentioned, what's the application process? We know we've been told that HMRC are going to set up an online portal, but that's a huge piece of work, really, particularly to make something which is resistant to fraud. So we suspect that might take certainly days, if not weeks, before that is up and running. Similarly, in terms of when you receive your grant payments, a lot of people are obviously very keen to know when will the cash actually arrive. We are fairly pessimistic on this at the moment. As I say, it's a huge operation to get set up, and then when those claims have got to start to come in, they've got to be processed. So, we think that there's a very good chance that money will not arrive until the end of April, and it could even be later than that. In terms of when the payments will be backdated to, so it's for all staff affected from the 1st of March. So if you did lay off staff in the run-up to the lockdown this week because you had no work, and put them onto furlough, you should be able to go back to anyone who's anyone from the 1st of March onwards. There's also a lot of sort of very good technical questions about how do you actually calculate the, what's the 80% of, and if you're a salary on a fixed employee, it's fairly straightforward. But for people on 0-hour contracts or people who get commission and other non-statutory payments, obviously we don't really have any of that detail as yet. And so this is one of the critical things we need clarity from the government on, as to how exactly will they work. Finally, the next question was, how do you process it through the payroll? Again, there's no indication on how this is going to work. We believe it's going to be a separate submission. So at the moment, where we do your payroll, or for those of you who do your own payroll, you have to do RTI submissions. We believe there'll be an additional submission to the current one, which will be how this payment is then processed. Another of the most common questions we've been asked is about directors, and will it cover director salaries? Again, the answer is we don't know, but we are very nervous about whether a director can be furloughed, because they will still have their director's duties, even if they're not going out and doing work on a day-to-day basis. So that is certainly one of the areas where we desperately need clarification as to whether the directors can apply. And if there are multiple directors in a business, whether one or two can remain doing the running of the business and the others can then be put on furlough. Some of you have also asked about employees who've already been laid off. It's certainly the case that we've seen some of our customers who'd laid off employees at the beginning of the month, as their work began to tail off, have now taken those back on and put them onto furlough. But it's not entirely clear what the rules around that are. Next, can employees undertake work when furloughed? This is clear. The answer is no. You can't do bits of work. You can't just reduce yourself to 1 hour a week, or as some people intended to do before the scheme was announced, just reduce everyone's hours by a quarter. It's really a case of you need some people working full time and then some people on furlough are doing absolutely nothing. One of the questions I got asked earlier was, well, what happens if one of my furloughed staff has to come back into the business to cover someone who's gone off sick with coronavirus? You would think common sense would apply and that would be allowable, but until we have the definitive detail, which we may not get for several weeks, we will not be able to answer that, I'm afraid. And then finally, can employees take on other employment when furloughed? And again, the answer on that is pretty clearly no. Sorry, I said finally, I forgot there's more coming in the last half hour. But can employees demand to be furloughed? Any changes, as we understand them, have to sort of comply with the employment contracts. So it needs to be an agreement between the employer and the employee to amend their contract. But yes, so I don't believe employees can demand to be furloughed, but obviously it's something that you need to agree between yourselves. And if you're in any doubt, we strongly advise you take HR advice. What about the 20% of wages that are not covered? The answer is you don't have to pay that to the staff. And based on the customers I've spoken to this week, I would say the vast majority of employers who are putting their staff onto furlough are only going to pay them the 80% and not top up the 20%. Next question was, what about the national insurance and pensions? And I've had different versions of this question, but certainly it's a case of we're awaiting guidance as to how this is going to work. We don't know the answers as yet, I'm afraid. And how long is the scheme going to last for? As I said earlier, it's going to be March, April and May. So I think it's probably just worth pointing out that, I apologise that an awful lot of the answers we do not know yet, but that's the current situation. And we're going to try and put all of this information up onto our website. And as the detail becomes clearer, we will then make sure that we let you know. So I'm going to move on to one of the next bits. And I know some of you are asking questions in the chat. I'll come back and try and deal with those and some others at the end of the webinar. Two of the other sort of quite big bits of relief that have been announced were the deferral of VAT and income tax payments. So your next VAT payment should not be taken by HMRC. This is eligible to all businesses. It's not something you have to apply for as far as we're aware. They just will not collect their next VAT direct debit. And this applies from the 20th of March up until the end of June. But please be aware, this is not a cancellation of that liability. It's just a deferral. So you will still have to pay that in the following quarter. So you basically get a 3-month loan from the government. Secondly, income tax, similar for self-employed people or people who pay tax on payment on account. your July's payment on account will not be collected, and you'll instead pay that amount next January. But again, this is not a cancellation of the liability. You will still have to pay that money. It's just you get an extra 6 months to make the payment. One of the things they announced fairly early on in the budget was the support for businesses who are paying sick pay. So this is now, you're eligible for staff to claim sick pay or SSP, not just from day 4 as it was, but from the first day that they're off ill. And that is for up to 2 weeks. And the SSP that you pay out to your employees can now be reclaimed from the government. And that is done through the payroll as normal. So if you've got staff off on sick, it's important that you process them properly through your payroll records, or let your payroll provider know that those guys are off sick, so that you can claim the money back and pay them the correct SSP. One of the other big areas is business rates relief and grants, and I'm focusing on what's happening in Wales, but there is information on the other parts of the UK, although it's relatively similar. The good news, if you're in retail, leisure or hospitality, you will pay no rates now for the whole of the 2021 financial year, as we understand it, so that's April to March. So you will not have to pay any business rates in that time, and that should just be automatic and applied through the business rate system. In addition to that, there are now a number of grants available. So again, retail, leisure, hospitality businesses with a rateable value of between 12 and 51,000 will get a grant of £25,000. And then all businesses, so as we understand it, not just the ones confined to that sector, with a rateable value of 12,000 or less, will get a grant of £10,000. So the main points just to highlight on that, these are things you have to apply for. And certainly Swansea went live last night, so you can now apply for the £25,000 grant via the Swansea Council website, and we've got a link to that page later on in the presentation. I know Carmarthenshire wasn't live this morning, but I would expect most local authorities to be up and running within the next 24 or 48 hours. So that's something you need to do. If you're eligible for those grants, you need to get on and apply for them sooner rather than later. In terms of the smaller one, the £10,000 grant, it says on the Welsh Government website that is not something you have to apply for. It will be administered automatically, but I have no idea what that means. So I would keep an eye on it in case it is something you need to apply for. And finally, they do also talk about a new small business grant on the Welsh Government website. But again, there is no detail on that, but keep an eye out for it, because there could be something that's available soon. And here we are. So here are some of the links to the local authorities, which are primarily in the areas that we deal with. As I say, there's certainly Swansea up and running. Carmarthenshire, we don't think have got the main grant available, but they have announced other potential reliefs and support that is available to particularly their tenants. And we haven't seen anything yet in Pembrokeshire, Neath, Talbot or Powys. But as I say, we've got clients all over South Wales, so please check with your local authority and look on their website, because these seem to be coming out all the time at the moment. So another very important intervention then that has come in this was actually announced in the budget, but it went live late on the day Monday, so you could start applying for these loans on Tuesday, and it's something called the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, or CBILS as it's become known. This is something that's administered by the British Business Bank, but effectively they're recommending that everyone approaches their own lender first. And in principle, it means that you should now be able to borrow money from ideally your existing lender through an overdraft or a loan or a few other ways. And the government is going to guarantee 80% of each loan. Now, that doesn't mean that they're guaranteeing your business 80%, but they're guaranteeing the lender that if your business was to fail, and the lender cannot reclaim the money from your business, whatever 80% of whatever is left will be covered by the government. The loans can be anything from £25,000 up to £5 million in value. And as we understand it, the businesses will get 12 months of that finance interest free, and then there will be normal repayments. So if you're eligible for the scheme, you need to have turnover of under 45 million and meet a number of other criteria. There is more detail coming out on this by the hour almost. So if you're in any doubt, go on to the British Business Bank website. We've got links to that later on, which will tell you how to work it. But essentially, the best thing to do is to go to your existing lender And I was looking on the Barclays website yesterday, so they've got a simple little questionnaire that takes you through a number of criteria that helps you understand if you can apply for this loan. And I believe most banks have got something like that now set up. I've spoken to a number of bank managers in the last couple of days, and their advice has been, if you've got a named bank manager, someone you normally deal with, speak to them or email them first. And then if you don't have a regular bank manager, go through the main helplines. But the advice also was actually trying to do it online will probably be quicker, because they think they will process the online applications more quickly than the ones that have gone through the phone and through their managers. Just so you understand, this is an additional package, and if the bank decides they could lend you this money anywhere under normal commercial terms, they will do. So this scheme is really put in place for businesses that wouldn't have qualified for a loan because of the problems that have been caused by coronavirus, but now are going to get that loan to help them through. And as I said earlier, there are a number of grants that are going to become available, but I think we could be looking at several weeks before that money arrives. So many businesses will need to rely on these new lending facilities in the short term to keep their cash flow going. Just one quick point as well. It's on the bottom of the slide there about the urgency of your need. I know of a lot of businesses that are in desperate need of this money. So if you are a business that has certainly got enough cash to last 3 or 4 months, you may want to put off making the application for a week or two to let the more desperate businesses, the ones who are more in desperate need of support, get it first. And when you look through the Barclays criteria, most of the questions most businesses would qualify for, but the key one will really be, can you prove that your business would have been able to afford this lending before the coronavirus outbreak? So, are you able to prove that you were a profitable business that was a viable lending proposition before the middle of March, essentially? And although your sales now may have totally dropped off the face of the earth, and no bank would want to lend you money today, as long as you can prove that actually at the end of February we had a very strong, profitable business, you should then have no problem in applying for these loans. So as I say, that's the link to the British Business Bank website. So when we send this around later, hopefully you can go onto there. It's got a full list of all the banks who are part of the scheme, and all of the major lenders who are probably your regular day-to-day banks will be included on that list. Another really important intervention the government has made is support for businesses paying tax and the time to pay. So I've already mentioned that you're automatically getting deferral of VAT and certain personal tax bills. But if you've got any other taxes that you're really struggling with, in particular corporation tax or PAYE, there's no automatic deferral of those liabilities, but you may well be able to get support or the ability to defer some of those payments, but you do need to ring up with them and negotiate them. And we've had a number of clients who've tried this in the last week, and I think almost all have been successful. So that's certainly something. They are listening. They are acutely aware of the problems facing business, and they are willing to help. So we strongly recommend, if you are struggling to make a tax payment, call the helpline and try and get it deferred. So I think that probably covers off the main points on support that have been mentioned. I'm now going to just run through a few other ideas which we think you need to think about, and then we'll come back at the end. But before I go through the other ideas, I just wanted to run through some of the questions that we've been asked, which I think go back to the government support on the whole. So one of the questions was, does your business have to be completely shut in order to claim, in order to furlough some of your employees? And our understanding is no, you don't need to shut your business entirely. If only some of your employees need to be put on furlough, because some of the business can still operate, then you should be able to claim just on those individual employees. Secondly, there was a question about CBILS and asking, is it to fill, can it be used for things other than coronavirus? The answer is, if your business was a viable business that could have money lent to it for a different project, then CBILS probably shouldn't apply. We think it's primarily to deal with issues surrounding the coronavirus, and certainly some of what we're hearing is about the conditions of those loans are the interest rates are quite high in future years. We think to deter people using them as a short-term, sort of a form of cheap finance. So be very careful with what you use that money for, and certainly look at the small print before you agree to anything. And in terms of how those loans are calculated, we've got a question, well, how much will I be eligible for? The standard lending criteria of the bank would still apply. So if you would only have been eligible for a £50,000 loan based on the size of your business before, we would still think it's going to be a £50,000 loan. Unfortunately, not everyone is eligible automatically for the £5 million loan. We've got a question about the VAT that's been deferred and the tax. Are you allowed to use that money to cover other bills? And the answer, as far as we're concerned, is yes. The reason they're deferring it is because they're aware that some businesses will need that money to pay the wages and other bills in the short term. But as I said, just bear in mind that you will need to pay that VAT in 3 months' time. So you will need to find a way to get that money back into your business. There was another question about, well, we've had a number of questions about specific sectors. There was one certainly about landlords and the fact that commercial landlords are not having the ability, or it's harder for them to defer their loan repayments. There is some specific guidance out there for commercial landlords, but a lot of it really is very much in favour of the tenants and making it harder to evict them at this time. So if you are a tenant or a landlord, it's worth reading the guidance that's on the government website. But our advice really at this time is just clear and open and honest communication, because we're all in a very difficult position at the moment. There's also been a question about whether annual leave continues to accrue through the furlough period, and whether pre-booked annual leave can be cancelled. Certainly, I know of a number of businesses that have cancelled annual leave because they're for various operational issues, particularly where a number of staff have gone off sick with coronavirus. But both of those questions are more HR questions, I'm afraid. I can't answer them now, but if I can find the answers for you, we'll get them on the website. We've then had a question about, will you continue to have to pay their Nest pension scheme whilst they're furloughed? As I said earlier, no strong guidance on this as yet, but we believe you probably will. And then a couple of more questions about the how to register on the HMRC portal. And as I said earlier, we haven't got the full detail on that as yet. A couple then again on CBILS and the fact that whether personal guarantees will be given. Our understanding is the bank doesn't have to look for security, but it's at their discretion up to £250,000. If you're looking to borrow more than £250,000, the bank will have to prove that they've checked that there isn't security in the business or from the directors first. But you cannot put your principal private residence as security for a CBILS loan as we understand it. And finally, I think there was a question about whether grants are taxable. And unfortunately, we don't know 100% as yet, but I'm pretty certain that the grants that come from the local authorities will turn out to be taxable. I've also got a few questions here now that have come from whilst we've been on the webinar. And it says, it states employment costs. Does this include employers' NI and pensions? And we believe that it does, but ultimately you've got to bear in mind the £2,500 limit. And as I say, at the moment, the wording is the cost. So we in our view, the cost includes pension and NI, but we'll have to wait for the full details to come out on that. We're looking to implement the furlough job retention scheme. Is there a risk associated with this? I suppose my honest answer is there is always a risk until you've got all the small print. But I think at the moment, most businesses are implementing it on the basis that they believe the government have made it fairly clear that this will apply and it should work. And the money should come back to them. I've got a question about what happens if you come off furlough more than once. And as I say, that's certainly one of the questions I've been asked several times, and we cannot answer that as yet. I'm afraid there is no guidance there. And then we've got a question about, should you be paying furloughed staff? I thought the basis of furloughing was that staff would not be entitled to any pay if the government rejected the application for relief. That's an excellent question, one I'll have a look at. As I say, I think there could be an issue in terms of if when the details become clear, there are staff that you've put onto furlough that you realise you're no longer going to get the grant for, and you make them redundant. That there would obviously be an issue if you've already paid them. So we'll have to have a look at that one in more detail and I'll come back to you with an answer. And the 12-month capital holiday for CBILS, as I understand it, yes, but it will depend on each individual lender. So every lender will have its own criteria and its own conditions. So there should be some capital holidays, we understand it, but we're waiting for the full details. And I think every lender will vary on that one. So I just want to run through now. Hopefully we've covered off the main support that's available. We now just want to talk through the some of the other advice that we're giving to customers at the moment. The first is a general one. It's nothing to do with accounts, but we strongly recommend that everyone adheres to the government advice and in particular looks after your own health. A lot of small business owners are obviously still desperately trying to get money in and keep the business going, but do bear your own health in mind in all of this. If the situation is changing very rapidly, so make sure every day you check the most up-to-date websites, those key websites, to see what has changed. And we strongly recommend you have an action plan and think worst case scenario, particularly when it comes to cash flow. So what we're recommending all our clients to do is to do a simple 3 to 6 month cash flow. On a fairly worst case scenario, assume that a lot of your customers are going to not pay your bills for the time being, and work out, well, what costs can you save, and are you in a position where you're going to need additional financial support so that you can apply for it. We mentioned there applying for the government support and bank support. I think those are urgent jobs where you're eligible. You should be doing it this week. And if you have had a major interruption to your business, we strongly recommend you also speak to your insurers. Whilst many clients have already spoken to their insurance and found they're not covered, I have heard of one or two who think they are covered. So it's very well worth understanding whether there's any potential insurance claim due to your business. And finally, another bit of general advice on this one. We've had a number of customers who have managed to find new ways to get some money in, from simple things like restaurants who've had to shut, who've started up takeaway operations, other businesses who've found that they've got large amounts of space which is empty that have now started renting it out on a short-term basis. So it's a good time to try and find new ways to either get to market or to generate new revenue. And I've got a fairly long list of other slides here now. These are just sort of general ways to try and improve your cash flow. But certainly when you're speaking to the bank, if you're looking for lending, if you've got a viable business plan, or if you've got a clear plan on how you're going to get through the next 3 to 6 months, it's a big help. As I say there on the third point, be very mindful if you're a director or a family member is giving guarantees for loans that already exist. If you're extending those loans, you are exposing your potential personal liabilities, so do bear that in mind. And often they will want guarantees for new debt. Think about, in terms of your business, is there any way you can improve and accelerate the business that's coming in? So look at credit control. Don't let that be forgotten about. Keep trying to raise money wherever possible, getting the money in as quickly as you can wherever possible. If you're carrying high levels of stock and your trading is falling, do you need to keep restocking as often as you have done? Can you reduce the stock, turn it into cash? I've already mentioned reviewing insurance policies to make sure if you can claim anything you do. You may well have agreed contracts and advance orders over the last few months. Have a think about, well, actually, do you still want to deal with those customers? And I'll be honest with you, I honestly believe there are a number of businesses that will not make it out to the other side of this crisis, which is a horrible thing to say and very, very sad. But you may need to be, unfortunately, fairly honest with yourselves. And there may be businesses that you can't continue to act with because they risk bringing your business down as well if they fail and you're too exposed to them. Review your routes to market, as I say, and we're all having to learn to do things differently, but it may be an opportunity to find different ways to sell to your customers. And when you get a chance, it's a good time to review your terms and conditions, because there may be things which don't really apply or need to be relooked at given the new way that we're all operating. I mentioned landlords earlier. I think it's really important, as I said, to maintain an open dialogue with landlords and agree the rent. And a lot of people are going to ask their landlords for rent deferrals. You need to take legal advice, generally, is our view, because often, if you breach your lease, you are going to find yourself in a difficult position. So make sure you have open and honest conversations. Certainly look at any capital expenditure as to any of that certainly needs to happen now or could be delayed somewhat. A lot of organisations have got loan finances and hire purchases, have had a lot of success in deferring and getting holidays. So that's certainly a good way to put some cash back into your business. And it's a good time to generally review your products and your services. Check which are the ones that aren't really making you any money. And in difficult times, are they things that you should be stopping doing or focusing on the more profitable products and services at the moment? I'd recommend reviewing your customer list, as I said earlier, and if you've got customers that have been a problem for you, have been hard to get money out of historically, that is unlikely to get any better over the coming months. So you may want to consider reducing your exposure to them and possibly doing less work with them and focusing on the customers who have treated you better over the last few months. And as I say, look at your debtors list and make sure you keep chasing up those overdue payments. From a supplier's point of view, it's a good time to try and extend the payment terms with your suppliers, and certainly make the most of payment terms. If you always pay people after 15 days, even though you normally have a 30-day limit, it may be worth considering using the full 30 days just to help your cash flow in the short term. And a final bit of advice, as I say, is a great time to make sure you put your extra effort into those relationships, particularly with those really strong, good quality customers who you've been looking after for many years and who you've got a good relationship with, because you're both going to need each other more than ever, I suspect, over the coming months. So just a couple of slides to finish. We've got some the up-to-date advice. We're going to keep our website up to date, but I've also got the Welsh website there and the UK website for you. So you've got the most up-to-date and the correct links at the end of the webinar when we email it around. And finally, it's just a message that if you do have any problems, if you're struggling with a bank or struggling to get hold of any of the finance, please speak to us. We are, we've had a very, very busy week. We've had an awful lot of inquiries with people asking about all the new systems that are coming out. And we're doing our very best to keep up with everyone. So please give us a ring. If you don't get hold of us, drop us an email. We'll come back to you as quickly as we possibly can. But please be aware we do have a number of customers who are in financial difficulty. We are trying to focus our time and support on those guys at the moment. And we'll try to get everyone else as quickly as we possibly can. So just to finish it, I'll just check to see if we've had any other questions through. And I can see we have had a few. So we had another question. Is there any help for rates when you're not a retail business, but a manufacturing business with a rateable value of over £12,000? At the moment, my understanding is no. I think it's only if you're over the £12,000 for the 3 sectors I mentioned earlier. But as I said, the Welsh Government have announced there will be other grants, so potentially there will be something that comes out of that. Also, a next question. If you would like to know, if a staff member has to be made redundant instead of going on furlough, do we have to do this? And you've said it's probably a HR question. I think you're right. Sorry, I can't help with that. You probably do need to take some HR advice. I know HR companies are being overwhelmed at the moment because there's an awful lot of questions being asked of them. So you probably need to speak to them about that one. Yeah, just to confirm, we are going to email the presentation across so that you get access to all the various links that we've put in it. And then the last question here now, as a company, if we furloughed our staff, our wages clerk would have to come into work to be able to process the payroll once a week. Can the wages clerk be furloughed? And my understanding is no, as I say, on the basis that you're, because as soon as you do any work for the business, you can't then be furloughed. So, you probably will need to keep that member of staff on to keep processing the payroll. The other option might be to outsource it on a temporary basis if it's cheaper to do it. But as I say, there's an awful lot of pressure on all payroll departments and teams up and down the country as they learn to live with all these new conditions, things like the new statutory sick pay and getting the new portal for HMRC, getting ready for that. So you may struggle to find it's an easy time to outsource payroll. I think that's all the questions that have been asked. But just to let you know, we're planning to hopefully keep running webinars every few days. So as more information becomes available, I apologize as I say that we haven't been able to answer all the questions that have been asked because we don't have the answers. But our hope is to keep running these webinars every few days so that you can have the most up-to-date information and hopefully get the right things done. So thank you all very much for listening. And I'm going to pause the webinar now. And as I say, I hope to hear from all of you in the coming days. Thank you.